Joining me now is congressional reporter for BuzzFeed, Kate Nocera, and editorial director at the Huffington Post Media Group, Howard Fineman. Howard, let me start with you. As Luke said, Steve Scalise does not like to raise the debt limit, which, of course, is one of the primary and basic functions of the U.S. Congress. How much is John Boehner ruining this day?
Well, I think he rues it in part, but in part, I think, in an odd way, it may be an advantage for him to finally have a Tea Party person in leadership, especially one from the South, especially one who's expressed these kind of views, because leadership does require compromise. At least in theory it does, and now we're going to get a real test to see at least a portion of the Tea Party, especially the southern-based portion, the one that would like to say no to everything, having to help in some way govern. And so in a way it gives John Boehner a sort of window into and a tie to the disruptive branch of his own majority in the House, and it'll be interesting to see how he can work with Scalise. Scalise is going to have to try, I think.
Kate, Jason Chaffetz has, I think, the quote of the day, and he's told Politico, speaking to the importance of this series of elections. Look at how many legislative days left there are. You get to whip the August recess. Good luck with that. Right. Written in there is who really cares, right? So that's one reading of the situation. But on the other, this election does set the table, if you will, for what happens after the midterm elections, in which leadership will once again begin anew. How do you read this in terms of importance and a legacy for the Republican Party?
I think it is really important. I mean, what this does is it sets up incumbency for Kevin McCarthy, for Steve Scalise, and for John Boehner. If he can maintain that support, it's going to be really hard to unseat him come January, which a lot of the conservative caucus has talked about significantly. I spoke to a number of conservatives yesterday who made very clear that if they wanted to shake up the leadership, it was this race that they were going to do it in, and if they failed this time, it was going to be very, very hard to mount a challenge in November.
Yeah, Howard, when you see Steve Scalise in that triptych that we just showed, one has a hard time imagining whether, after the midterms, which is when the leadership contest will begin anew, whether Kevin McCarthy takes over the Speaker's gavel if, in fact, John Boehner gives it up.
Well, first of all, I don't think Boehner's going to give it up. But if he does, in that triptych you had there, which of these three is not like the other? Right. You know? And it's Steve Scalise. But I don't know if he would be able to muster the kind of support and enthusiasm across the Republican conference necessary to win. My reading on this is that Boehner, in a way, lucks out here, assuming he wants to stay. Eric Cantor was both a help and a hindrance to Boehner. Cantor was always maneuvering for himself. He was always maneuvering on his own. Boehner spent half his time working with Cantor and the other half looking over his shoulder to see what Cantor was up to. I don't think Kevin McCarthy's quite that kind of guy. I don't think McCarthy would be maneuvering to oust Boehner, and I think McCarthy would have trouble if he were to attempt to do so. So I think my guess is that you're looking at the leadership not only for right now, but assuming Boehner wants to stay, and I think he does, for the next session of Congress. And by the way, in terms of what it means for legislation, none of this, in legislative terms, I'm not sure how much any of this matters, because none of the Republicans were prepared to move on anything with the Democrats and Barack Obama.
Right. Kate, the readout from Politico is that new leaders will be focused on self-preservation. Well, what have they been focused on for the last, year? Is there any, to Howard's point, is there anything we can expect from this House other than, sort of vanity votes?
No, frankly. As Chaffetz says, there are only a certain number of days left before the August recess, and then we'll have the August recess, and then everyone's just going to be running for re-election again. So I think that at this point, it's a stabilizing vote, that the leadership wants to stay in a place where they just don't make too many waves, right? That was part of why McCarthy ascended in the first place, because they didn't want a huge shakeup to kind of disrupt what they have going on until January.
Kate, let me ask you a follow-up question since you are in the underneath the Capitol dome. How did Scalise win this? Do you know it's like to what degree Stutzman was a kingmaker and gave his votes to Roscom or Scalise? I mean, do we have any readout on the sort of internal mechanics? I know they don't keep the final vote tally. They don't release the final vote tally. But do you know anything about what happened in that room?
I don't know a lot of the mechanics or the details. I know that Scalise walked in with all of his whips and supporters behind him, sort of as a show of, you know, hey, look at everyone I have. And I think that really what it came down to was that, just as others have said, they didn't want another blue state Republican at the leadership table. They didn't want this. Not that people were super jazzed about Scalise being in that position, but he was the better alternative to Roscom, who hails from Illinois.
Yeah,
Alex, I have a sense that McCarthy may not, you know, who's become well known and well regarded for his vote counting and his own whipping abilities, necessarily went all out for the guy who was on his leadership team just before now, which is Roscom. I think Kevin McCarthy, who's a pretty shrewd politician inside the corridors there, realized it would be better for, as Kate said, the stability of the situation if they did bring the Southerner in, if they did bring the guy from Louisiana in. It didn't help Roscom that he sort of came from the same place Henry Hyde came from that old Midwestern, the sort of Midwestern Republicanism that the new Tea Party people are trying to get beyond. They don't like the symbolism of that. And, you know, Kevin McCarthy gets a pass because he's from California, but not the guy from Illinois.
Right. I mean, the fact is, you could have had a triptych that featured one man from Ohio, one man from California, and one man from Illinois. And if we are talking about the modern Republican Party, it is not in those three states. Kate Nocera and Howard Fineman, thank you guys both for your time and thoughts.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you.